are live currently. Yay. Oh, it's live. Okay.
That's live.
Hi, everyone. We're back here at the Mighty, and today we will be talking about mental health as it relates to the Asian American community. And here I'm joined by some wonderful guests. To introduce myself, my name is Matt Rivera. I was on the last BIPOC mental health awareness digital panel. And I'm here to basically get into it all and have a really great discussion with everyone. And I will hand it over to you guys to introduce yourselves.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Alice. I am based in Los Angeles, California. I identify as a queer Asian American. I'm a first-generation Chinese American, so both my parents are immigrants. And did I already say I'm in LA? Yeah, I did. I'm based in Los Angeles. I'm an actor, photographer, and yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh,
Sean,
I guess I'll go. Yeah, I'll go. Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Chong-Umeda. I live in Los Angeles. My pronouns are he, him, they, them. I don't care. It's all good. Majesty, perfect. I work in LA as an event producer as well as a producer for Buzzfeed. Fun fact, I don't know how to ride a bike. I don't know. Stuff like that. Cool.
Hey everyone, I'm Kevin Wong. I'm the Vice President of Communications at the Trevor Project. I use he and him pronouns, and I'm based in New York.
Yay. So we've got some really great, amazing guests with us today, and I'm excited to get into it. So first of all, how is everyone doing today? Just to check in with everyone's overall mental health. Are we doing good? It's the middle of the week. How are y'all doing?
I feel good today.
Yeah, the weather's really nice today. I just had a lovely breakfast. I feel like things are good. Probably going to go to the park after this. Yes.
Oh,
it is
yeah.
hot.
It's hot.
I'm currently sweating. Very cool. So yeah, to get into the discussion, we have a couple of really amazing topics to discuss. And one of the first ones, which is probably going to be one of the more fun parts of the discussion as well, is we're going to be tackling dating in the Asian American community and a lot of the stigmas and just issues and experiences that we as Asians or queer Asians have gone through going in the dating world. And I would love to hear about everyone's kind of personal stories about this because as we all know, and if you relate to gay or queer dating as an Asian American, it can be pretty difficult. And I've personally found that in a place like LA, or maybe every metropolitan city, but I feel like there's a lot of microaggressions or silent racial tensions that are involved in dating. And I'd love to hear what you guys have experienced and how it has affected like your mental health and your self-worth.
I feel like the elephant in the room could be sexual racism and dating apps. Should we start there?
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
let's do it. Let's dive in.
I mean, what are y'all's favorite apps? Let's start there.
I've had the most success on Hinge in terms of like actually meeting quality people. I don't know. It's hard because I feel like I'm very particular with the kind of people that I'm interested in, and it's hard for me to tell if I'll even be attracted to someone, but like off of an app. So Hinge has been so far the best, but I hate apps in general.
I think
Same.
quality, maybe not quality wise, but like I've used the whole plethora of apps. I had Tinder, I've had Jack'd, I've had Bumble, Coffee Meets Bagel. I've had the whole plethora. I think my most successful app is, at least in terms of at least meeting people, is Tinder. Yeah, I mean, I think Bumble and Hinge has some like great quality people as well, but I think Tinder has been the most successful for me.
So for me, I'm like you, Sean. I've tried a few different ones, and I think the barriers that I see the most are probably in the ones that are based on just pictures, right? So like the Grinders and the Jack'd, although somebody did tell me that Jack'd they have better luck with if they're Asian. So things
Not
like
me.
Tinder. Oh, really?
Yeah, no.
Well, so
I don't even
actually,
know what Jacked is.
Tinder or Hinge, it sounds like, might be a better option for you because they get to know a little bit more about who you are, which is one of the reasons why, I'll be honest, sometimes when I was single, I didn't love apps. I didn't love using apps because when you're meeting somebody in real life, they get to know who you are first and they don't judge you based on a picture, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely used and been on all the apps, and it's been hit or miss, but I feel like especially in a place like LA, I've come across a lot more. I mean, it does feel like straight up discrimination, to be honest. Like I mean, we've all seen the profiles, the bios where they say like, no fats, no femmes, no Asians. I'm sure we've all seen that little line on a little Twinkie white person's profile more often than not. And I think that's a really harmful thing because I think that a lot of people in the queer community like have still not broken out of the white mold or of that being the standard of like queer attraction of beauty, like being more Western looking or having a really fit body or something like that. And I found that like over time it has worn down on my self-confidence, and I feel like we have to really actively change that ideal because it's just not going to serve us first of all, and it's not going to serve the queer community at large as well.
I think it's interesting too hearing about kind of like the queer male or male identifying experience versus my experience, because I feel like oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, my phone is on. I feel like the kind of discrimination that I've experienced on dating apps is more subtle. I haven't really seen the like no Asians thing although I know that exists for queer men. For me, it's more like, I don't know, maybe this is just a self-perception thing, but I feel like sometimes on dating apps, what Kevin was saying, that like people are very quick to judge based off just your photo. And it wasn't until I like moved out of the Bay Area and realized that I was a racial minority that it suddenly hit me that when people see me, especially a picture of me, the first thing they notice is that I'm Asian, which is so weird because it's not something that I'm consciously thinking about throughout the day. But I feel like on apps, I am very conscious of that.
Question: as a woman, and if you're receiving messages from males, how often do you get fetishized, or at least they say something that's more microaggressive towards you?
I don't have men on my dating apps anymore just because they're too thirsty and it's too much. And I'm very selective with men, but like very, very selective. But I have encountered definitely a fair share of like yellow fever, as they call it, in my life. It's always a weird thing because, I think, Kevin, you brought this up during our meeting yesterday, but, the idea of like, where's the line between an Asian fetish and just appreciating a specific race or ethnicity? It's a fair question, I think, because I don't know. It's difficult to distinguish between the two, but it's pretty common. It's less so with women though. I have yet to encounter a woman who is like, I love Asian women and I only date Asian women. And like have that, or if that person was not themselves also Asian, if that makes sense.
For me, that's kind of interesting because like I actually haven't really faced anyone that had like really yellow fever. Unless, at least to my knowledge, I didn't think that anyone who would like reach out to me or whatever had yellow fever. It was more, the fetishism wasn't about me being Asian. It was me being more effeminate. I think was probably more of the fetish than the actual like, oh, you're Asian. Maybe like that and maybe that intertwines because I know stereotypically the stereotype is, Asian gay men are more effeminate or blah blah blah. That's a whole different discussion that we can talk about. But
we can talk about it.
I mean, we can talk about it too. But like for me, it's maybe I'm lucky that I feel like people weren't like fetishizing me for being Asian, but I felt fetishized because I was more effeminate than your typical gay male, I think, at least for my experience.
Yeah.
Something that Alice was saying around, I forgot the way you phrased it, but it was kind of like coming to terms with acceptance around Asian identity in dating. So for me, growing up, it sounds like you grew up in the Bay Area. For me, I didn't have I didn't have a ton of Asian friends growing up. Would it be fair to say you might have?
Yeah, my school was probably like predominantly Asian, so I didn't realize I was a racial minority until I went to college.
Yes. Oh, that's what. Okay.
Yeah.
And when I was figuring out dating and identity for myself when I was a little younger, I didn't really have a group of Asian friends. And when I found that group eventually is around the time that I had that conversation around what is the difference between fetishization and knowing that we are a beautiful people and that we deserve certain amounts of attention and finding where that fine line is. So I think that is helpful, right? Like having that group of people who have similar backgrounds or identities as you, super helpful in navigating that for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I think another thing that I wanted to speak about in regards to like Asian dating is not just like the racial bias that we've experienced as Asians, but the racial bias that I've put upon myself. So I recently noticed, because I like recently started talking to somebody who is Chinese, and I realized that it is the first Asian person that I've ever like come close to dating. And that was a really wild thing for me to think about, because I realized that I am predominantly attracted to white people. And then I started thinking about where that came from. And I remember, you know, before I realized I was queer, when I thought I was straight in high school, I feel like I don't know, maybe I'm speaking for too many people, but I feel like almost every Asian American girl can relate to this like fantasy of wanting, or heterosexual Asian American girl can relate to the fantasy of like wanting a white boyfriend, because there's something about that it was a status thing back then. Like I remember in high school, I just like wanted to date like a hot white guy that looked like fucking what's his name, Pete Hutchinson or whatever. I don't know.
Pete Davidson?
No, not Pete Davidson.
Or Josh Hutcherson.
Josh Hutcherson, thank you.
Okay, short kings welcome.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just threw a name out there, but yeah, I feel like I used to have this like ideal of dating a white guy, and my mom used to always want that for me too. Like she used to always talk about how cute mixed babies were and things like that, which obviously didn't help. And then on top of that, you have all of this white representation in the media. You know, like you see predominantly white women representing, you know, or modeling for all of these different like fashion brands and things like that. So I basically grew up feeling like wishing I was white. Like I wish that I didn't look the way that I was. And especially when I went to college, there was one day it hit me. Every single day, somebody or something says something that reminds me that I'm Asian. And I thought that was so weird. I'm like, why is this something that is constantly being brought to my attention? It's literally just like part of who I am. But I've recognized my inherent racial bias, because even when I'm swiping on apps, sometimes I'll come across another Asian person. And my first thought will be like, oh, I'm not really that into Asians. And then I'm like, why? Why? Why do I do that to myself? That's so weird. Like, that's literally my own race. So I don't know if Sean or Kevin, you guys want to speak on that?
I actually have the exact opposite of you, Alice. Like, I'm coming from Hawaii, right? So Hawaii is predominantly Asian and mixed hapa people. Hawaii, I think, is the only again, like I think more than like a third of us are mixed or considered mixed. So like I grew up with Asian people everywhere, you know, like everyone was mixed with something. And so I moved from Hawaii to LA was a huge culture shock. Like I knew I was a minority when living in Hawaii, because like, you know, I was always told that. And like, if you go to like mainland America, be prepared. But when I moved here, I was like, for college, I was like, whoa, what is like, I was like, what is this? Like, there's like, I went to a predominantly white college as well. And so I think it was only like less than 10% of us were Asians. I think it was like 5%. So it was a very small population, but because of that, though, I was able to go to all the cultural clubs, and I was able to make great relationships with, you know, a lot of Asian Americans, and that's how I kind of developed my Asian American identity, and you know what I want to do in the future for, you know, when I throw events and whatever. But because of that, you know, I always was more predominantly Asian, because even though mainstream media was like, you want to date the white guy, growing back home, all of us were mixed, all of us were somewhat Asian, so I was just used to it. And so I would, not only that, but at least with my experience with dating, especially when I was younger, I was open for anyone. I just wanted someone to love me, but no one did.
Don't we all?
Oh, it hurts too close to home. But but like I didn't really care. But it seemed like whenever I was on these apps, the only guys that would respond were Asian guys, and so that's why most of my exes are Asian, because they're the only ones that responded. Ironically, now it's a little bit different. Ironically, now a lot of different ethnicities are like messaging me back. So I'm like, cool work. This is my chance. But yeah, my experience was totally different. It was predominantly Asian men. And I was open to dating everyone, but it was just like, for me, it was like, wow, like I would message someone and then they wouldn't respond, or they would ghost me, or like, they would be like, sorry, not into Asians or whatever. I'll be like, okay, but like after your like 10th or 15th one, it's like, okay, like I get it, I'm Asian, like cool. But yeah, that's my experience with apps.
Do you mind me asking if y'all are out to your parents? This is related, I swear.
Yes, I am.
Yes.
So
we'll talk more about that later. Bookmark that. That's a long conversation.
Yeah, I never got to officially formally come out still to my parents. I mean, my dad actually passed before I could. And my mom, it's never been brought up, ever.
Got it. Okay. So this is related, I promise. So I, at the time, had been dating one or two or some number of men. And then they happened to be white up until that point. And my dad came up to me. And in the beginning, it was a little rocky with my father, right? And then eventually my dad came up to me and he was like, have you ever thought about dating Asian men? And I was like, wow, Dad, clocked.
Progressive.
I thought about it from then on. And it's always been in my mind. But that's also a weird form of acceptance, right? It's almost like, okay, I've taken a step back now. I love you wholly as a father. Why don't I just kind of like sneak in this question? I accept you, but also, have you ever dated an Asian guy, Kevin? So that was like a weird 1-2 punch for me, but I've not stopped thinking about that since.
That's really interesting, because I think also that I've thought about that concept too. The idea of like bringing someone home to my family. So I've thought of every scenario because I've never introduced a partner to my parents before, and that's something that brings me a lot of anxiety. So I've thought of like, what if I bring a white cis female home? What if I bring someone who's trans or non-binary home? My mom is like very transphobic, and like I would not want to subject my partner to that. So like that's something I've thought of. And then I've also thought of like, what if I bring a cis male home? Like the chances of me like romantically dating a cis man at this point in my life, I think are like close to none, but I'm still open to it if it happens. So I thought about that too. And that also gives me a lot of anxiety because then my mom would invalidate my entire experience of my sexuality throughout my life and be like, see, I told you, you just had to meet the right one, you know? But it kind of recently dawned on me. I was like, I feel like bringing a Chinese girl home would like kind of be the best case scenario because someone who is able to speak in my parents' language that's an experience that I've never really had before, and it never occurred to me until recently. So it's funny that you bring that up because I do think that that's a very relevant point. That's an interesting way that your dad phrased that though.
That is actually very cute though.
Yeah, he's come a long way. While we're on the topic, he has come a very long way, and now it has gone from, should we take you to a doctor, all the way to, hey, your niece just had her first sneeze. Do you want to bring Danny over, my partner, over for dinner? I'm like, thank you, but this means a lot.
I think it's very interesting. Like if we're talking kind of about like meeting, having our significant other meet, our parents or whatever. Like luckily for me, my parents are very chill, very relaxed. Like I grew up I'm very lucky because I know not a lot of people have the same experiences that I do. But I grew up in a very loving household. My dad was a hippie. Well, first off, when I say dad, let me just before. My dad is white, or like when I say dad, he's my stepdad. But the reason why I do call him dad is because he raised me when I was young, and he's raised me like his own son and his own blood. So to me, he's like my real father. He's white. He grew up in the 70s. He's done everything under the sun. He's had sex with a dude before. So like he's like cool. He was cool. My mom was cool with it. But the most surprising thing was like my younger brother. My brother was, I think, 7 at that time. And I was more nervous because I felt like I didn't want to like burden my younger 7-year-old brother and explain to him why I have a male part or whatever. And I brought my first boyfriend ever to meet my family and everything. And he is within the fast food chain royalty. I'm not gonna name the restaurant or the fast food chains or whatever, but my brother really loves one of the chains, and so he goes, as long as you have this at the wedding, I'm fine with it. So I was like, cool, I'm gonna just make sure we have all of this fast food at the wedding. And like my 7-year-old brother doesn't care. He's cool with, my significant other at that time. No big deal. But to me, I wasn't even worried about my family, like my parents. It was like my brother, my 7-year-old brother. And I'm like, I don't know why.
I mean, that's really cute.
That's cute.
Yeah. For me, I have a similar experience as Alice, and a very opposite experience of Sean, where I definitely felt growing up for a long time, like, I didn't feel proud of being Asian, or proud of, just, or accepting, Asian beauty in myself and others. And so I grew up with this idea that, like, white is right. And so that stuck with me for a while, and I had to really learn how to break out of that, because that's my own internalized racism that I had to deal with in finding love or dating or whatever. And I didn't come out till I was 26 here in LA, and because like I'm from Hawaii too, like Sean, and growing up during when I did, like, there were such horrible, growing up in the 90s and stuff is a different time. And so there's a whole different attitude towards homosexuality, and homophobia was so accepted back then. So I grew up not accepting myself for a long time. And that coupled with, not accepting or being proud of my Asian heritage, that definitely did transfer over into my dating life, because I felt I couldn't find love with my own people, or like my own community. I could only search for love in all the wrong places. And so I had to really come to terms with that, and find a way to be proud of myself, which I am now. And I really think that queer Asians in our community really have to struggle to break out of that, because a lot of times we don't have a strong sense of identity ourselves. And I think it's really important that we love ourselves and love people that look like us too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, Pat, we love you.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, that was very fun. I feel like we could go on forever. Oh, do you have something, Alice?
Oh, I was just gonna, transition to the next topic, sort of related to what we were just talking about with family. Mm-hmm. But go ahead and say your thing, and then I'll back off that.
Yeah, dating as a queer Asian, I feel like is a months-long discussion that we could have, and I would love to even explore it more in depth sometime soon. But I would love to shift the focus to generational mental health, and how mental health is viewed and treated within the Asian community. And I'd love to hear from you guys.
Mental health in my family doesn't exist. Mental illness is not a concept. I've tried to speak with my mom about it, about depression and ADHD primarily, because I feel like that's something that I've struggled with since I was a kid. But I've brought it up to my mom seriously twice, and both times we got in huge fights about it, because she reacted as if like I was telling her that something was mentally wrong with me, which I guess technically I was. But the way she reacted made me feel like my mom didn't want to feel like there was something wrong with her kid. Does that make sense? So like, and I feel like mental illness is not really discussed in China. I mean, both my parents are immigrants, as I mentioned, and my mom has been through a lot in her life. My mom has powered through it. But I feel like in a lot of ways, she doesn't really acknowledge how like life trauma and things like that can actually affect your present day. I feel like my mom's mentality is very much like get through the hard stuff and then just keep going. But I don't think she realizes that like things will catch up to you after a while. So it's been difficult to have, especially the topic of like sexuality, have that conversation with my mom because I don't think she understands like the way that she speaks to me and how that affects me mentally. And I've tried to explain to her, you know, like I'm trying to maintain a relationship with you, like I'm trying to be close to you, but like my mom basically is homophobic on a religious basis. I say that with question marks because my parents were loosely Christian until I came out to my mom, and then all of a sudden my mom started going to church again, and that like just felt really weird to me that she was utilizing like religion as in retaliation to me coming out to her. But yeah, mental illness is definitely a difficult thing to talk about, and I've heard the same thing from pretty much every Asian American or child of immigrants in my life. If you guys want to speak more on that.
What you just said, okay, so the issues are not in silos, right? What you just said about having tough discussions around mental health and LGBTQ identity or queer identity, they intersect in ways that maybe you notice impact to you, or maybe you don't know, but your mom might not see that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, so I have a family member who has experienced depression, anxiety, has attempted suicide, and when I was trying to tell my parents about it, my father specifically, who immigrated from Hong Kong, he swept it under the rug and said that depression isn't real and that it's all in your head. And when we were talking about medicine, specifically antidepressants, he said that there was no need for antidepressants. Antidepressants didn't do anything to him, or to his understanding, not he took them and they didn't do anything to him. So to his understanding, antidepressants had no effect and everything was in your head. And you could fix yourself just by meditation, by doing exercising regularly, and he thought that was it. And I had to have some very frank conversations. Obviously, you know, this was years ago. Obviously, now I work at the Trevor Project, and it's very mental health forward. So having some serious conversations with him around the suicide public health crisis has kind of pulled him to our side a little bit. So he gets it now, I think. So if that were to happen today, I don't think he would have had the same reaction.
For me, like I think if I talked about mental health now versus mental health 10 years ago when I was 17, it would be completely different. I think mental health, especially like only 10 years ago, wasn't a big thing, at least with my experience, you know. And I battled, you know, I have high functioning depression and I've, you know, attempted suicide. So, and for me, like I didn't want to, and it took me a while to tell my family all of this. It took me to like past college to tell my parents, not because it was just more like I didn't want to feel like a burden to them, or feel like, because like I guess the reasons for my triggers and everything was just felt like I could ever be as good as them, because to me I've seen they were like my role models, they were my everything, like they are the power couple, they've done all of this, all of that, and all of this, and I feel like I can never compare to them. But once I actually did open up to them, and you know we had like an open dialogue about mental health, and obviously seeing a trained therapist and everything, it definitely helped. But you know, again, like when I was 17, I feel like in high school mental health wasn't a thing. I don't think, you know, we talked about our issues or anything. It was just more like, you'll get over it, it's okay, like just sleep it off, you know, like, you know, tomorrow's a brand new, like some, even to the point where it's a little bit of a toxic positivity, where it's like, you know, my problems are worse than your problems, so you're okay. But in reality, you know, everyone's problems are valid. And I think nowadays, I think at least talking with my family about mental health is a lot better and a lot more understanding, and something that we can discuss than 10 years ago.
Nice. Yeah, for me, I definitely struggled a lot as an adult. Looking back at even just looking at my family now, and also back when like my father was around and when I was with my mom and all that stuff, I definitely see that mental illness definitely runs in my family. And it was never discussed. And I think that something that Asian communities really struggle with, in addition to mental health issues like that, is basically just communication and like saying things out loud. And it sucks that like a lot of times in these households, like there's so many secrets, or like there's things that are unsaid, and there's things that like you as the child shouldn't know, and you find out maybe like later in life as an adult, and you're like, what the fuck? And so you see all those things happening all the time, and it's hard to approach because you don't know what the solution is, community wide per se. And I guess what I can really attribute it to is just the lack of open, honest communication between Asians, period.
Yeah, I think speaking about things or speaking about feelings in general in the Asian community is just not done. I don't know what your experience is like with your family, but like, for example, I feel like in Chinese culture, a lot of parents show their love through acts of service as opposed to like words of affirmation, if we're talking about love languages. I distinctly remember the first time I said I love you to my mom on the phone, and she was shocked. Like, she didn't know how to respond. It was a very like interesting thing, but that's not something that we vocalize with each other. So
yeah,
I feel like it all kind of ties into Asian culture in general and just not speaking about those things.
I think those values, I guess, are internalized because we think about our parents or the older generation as experiencing the world that way and communication that way. But I have seen that trickle down to me too, right? Like the way that I communicate with friends or peers, coworkers, even in relationships, and then communicating back up to them. I feel that 100%.
Yeah, it took me up until like my mid-20s, I'm 34 now, to even know how to openly communicate with my friends or even to myself. And that goes back to understanding how trauma can affect you later in life, and especially when you're raised this way. It's like, how else do I be, And I feel like that's what causes a lot of people within our community, either our age or the older generation, to really break down, because we're not equipped to deal with these thoughts and feelings and emotions, and it should change. I don't know.
I would also say it's young Asian American youth too, right? We think about the ways that the internet or social media has changed communication styles. I think it's still a thing. So the Trevor Project's research team, we just put out this research brief a few months ago that said that Asian American Pacific Islander LGBTQ youth reported lower rates of depressed mood and suicidality. So thoughts of suicide, considering suicide, attempting suicide. And when you think about it, like, we are saying, actually, hey, now that we're open and honest, we are communicating that we did experience some shit, right? I verified that we could curse, or we verified that we could curse, by the way. And I think when you look at that a little deeper, right, like, research is a number, statistics are a number, but they don't always account for cultural nuances or competencies. And if we're saying right now that communication or showing signs of weakness, etc., are not things that very many Asian Americans do, it makes sense that a lot of Asian American LGBTQ youth might not report to their parents or to a doctor that they experience depressed moods or have attempted or thought about suicide seriously.
Yeah, I actually know of a lot of Asian people who didn't realize that what they were experiencing all through their childhood was clinical depression until they were older, and actually like learned about it from other sources.
Have you guys ever tried to have direct mental health discussions with either your parents or people in your family about either yourself going to therapy or trying to maybe nudge them into seeking mental help?
Yes, I have spoken to my mom about therapy a couple times, mostly, to ask about health insurance and things like that and what was covered. And it always started this discussion of, well, why are you going to therapy? Because I think my mom has this idea that only broken people go to therapy, even though therapy is beneficial for everybody, regardless of what state of life you're in or if you have mental illness or not. And it was a similar kind of reaction to when I brought up ADHD as a teen, to where my mom was asking me like, "Are you okay?" And then I remember like, oh, this actually happened somewhat recently in the beginning of the pandemic. I asked my mom about health insurance and therapy or something, and then she called me a couple days later while I was in the grocery store crying, and my mom does not cry, so it really like shook me. I thought someone had died, and she was worried about me because she thought I was like suicidal. And I was like, no, mom, I'm going to therapy because I'm just trying to be like a better, stable human. I'm not on the brink of suicide or anything like that. And I had to explain that to her because I think she thought that only people who go to therapy are like on the edge of, giving up. And it was an interesting perspective because I didn't realize, it taught me a couple things. One, that obviously my mom is concerned for my well-being at the end of the day, and that's really all it is. So I do have to remind myself that it's a lot of the times it's not a lack of love, but more so a communication difference, and a difference in upbringing and what mental health means to my mom versus me. And I didn't realize that she had that view of therapy. So that was a very recent discussion that I had with my mom.
Do you guys think that it also is attributed to, as Asians, we definitely like to keep up with the Joneses in a sense? And do you feel like cultural attitudes prevent seeking mental help because they're like, number one, you're not going to tell some stranger all our family secrets, and number two, you're not going to pay him either?
I think it's more also just the social stigma. I believe that with at least, especially with a lot of like Asian cultures, society, you want to be perceived a certain way by society. The more respect you have by having X, Y, and Z means you're higher status. People are going to like you more. I mean, I think that's just any culture in general, any society in general. And so by being like, hey, I'm seeing a therapist for my mental health, I think a lot of times they don't want to talk about it because they might think, oh, you must be weaker, you might be inferior, or all of these negative connotations that come with therapy, and it's gonna dock their social status, which they don't want.
Yeah. Stigma. So Sean used the word stigma. Stigma is so real when it comes to mental health in general, right? One of the reasons why it's so forbidden or taboo to talk about suicide, it gives it that power, right? That if you just talked about it openly, maybe that would go away. That stigma would go away. And it's the same with being LGBTQ. There are certain stigmas or negative connotations still related to being LGBTQ. When you put those two things together, it can really make people look at you in a different light when you talk openly about your mental health and your LGBTQ identity.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually also recently thought about, communication with my family and therapy and how that kind of ties into everything. And it occurred to me, if I can find because I think that the biggest issue with me communicating with my mother specifically, and my dad is in the picture too, but he's more quiet about all these things. Like I don't have direct discussions with him as much, which is why I talk about my mom mostly. But my mom and I have a really hard time communicating about things like mental health because I think of the linguistic barrier more than anything. There's the religious, the generational, and the cultural barrier as well. But the linguistic barrier, the fact that my mom's first language is Mandarin and mine is English, and neither of we can't speak each other's languages well enough to really have like a deep intellectual conversation. So I thought about the idea of finding a bilingual Mandarin and English-speaking therapist and possibly going to family therapy with my mom. But to do that would require having a conversation with her about what therapy is and erasing that stigma in my mom's mind because she is so hell-bent on thinking that that's only for people who like really, really need it. So, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think that it's definitely something that we have to go outside of our comfort zones with, especially when dealing with our family, because there are so many walls to break down. And I think that just taking the first step to bring it up in however way feels less scary or comfortable, I think is the way to approach it. I know it's not going to be easy for anyone coming from a very strict traditional, Asian culture type of household to have that conversation, but it just starts with taking those little steps. So yeah, definitely. Kevin, do you know of any resources specifically that Trevor provides to Asian Americans at all in this sense, or?
So our crisis counselors, they are trained. They have cultural competencies, but they're also trained to have tough emotional conversations with all race ethnicities groups. I would also add like just being a good person who is an active listener, empathetic, asks open questions. Like those skills go a really long way. You don't have to be a licensed mental health professional. You don't have to be a trained crisis counselor. You just have to be a good friend at times, right? And acceptance really does go a long way. Whether that means if you're a parent listening, or if you have a peer who has come out to you and has an LGBTQ identity or intersecting identities that you're learning about, acceptance really does go a long way. We found that just one accepting adult can reduce an LGBTQ's rate of attempting suicide by 40%. And from a public health perspective, 40% is a huge, massive number.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so moving on, I definitely also wanted to cover in this discussion, given that we've been all dealing with this very uncertain time in the face of COVID and a worldwide pandemic and civil unrest. I know a byproduct of that has been a lot of anti-Asian sentiment, and I think it's very important to bring up because while I think Black Lives Matter is the movement right now, and it's something that we all should be paying attention to and focusing on, I think that an amazing byproduct of that is that we are now having the discussions because we're seeing that trickle over into our community as well. So I would love to hear, have you guys ever experienced any type of that anti-Asian sentiment during lockdown, quarantine, COVID, etc.?
I have not yet, not specifically related to COVID, but ever since, there was one day in the beginning of the pandemic, my mom called me and basically told me, she was like, don't leave your apartment. And I'm like, yes, I know we're in quarantine. Why? And she was like, a bunch of cars and houses of Chinese families in our city have been getting vandalized and smashed and things like that. And people are being attacked. And that scared me. Like I broke down immediately because my parents live in the Bay Area. Like it's predominantly Asian. And the fact that those hate crimes were still happening in a place where most of the population is Asian was really terrifying to think about. And it suddenly made me feel not safe, even in Los Angeles, even in a city as liberal as LA, as they say. But there's conservative people everywhere, and there's people who don't, like, people who don't understand race and things like that. So since the pandemic started, I definitely, every single time I leave the apartment, I'm like, I'm Asian. And I'm almost like on defense, like waiting for something to happen because I don't want to be unprepared if I were to encounter that. So my mentality has definitely shifted in the wake of everything happening.
For me, it's very similar to Alice, where I thankfully haven't had anti-Asian sentiment, but it's more like my parents were calling me as soon as the pandemic happened, and because they saw the news, on the media outlets, they're like, oh no, this person's being attacked, and they happen to be Asian. This person's being killed because they happen to be Asian. They're like worried about me. Thankfully, I live in a predominantly Asian neighborhood, so I feel a lot more safe. But at the same time, there's always that thought of what if. And I think as of right now, the only anti-Asian sentiment I've ever had to kind of not even deal with, because I never really had to deal with it, but just more see it, is just online with the trolls and just with those blank profiles that are protected by a screen. but I never had to deal with it, in person.
I was going to say the same thing. So I live in two places. First is Long Island City in Queens, which is very Asian. And the second is the internet. I live on the internet. And there can be really great things about the internet, right? Like finding community in Asian American spaces, LGBTQ spaces, but that also means folks can find you in those spaces, right? So having negative interactions, especially with folks who target you just because you're Asian or who put in your face and all of a sudden rename COVID-19 or coronavirus to the China virus, those things add up, right? Those things, which I guess would be between microaggression and aggression, ? Those things add up and can negatively impact your mental health.
Yeah, I haven't really encountered it directly myself, although I have, over the years, have had random encounters of racism. I remember one time I'm just walking down the street and some guy just comes up to me and goes, "I love your food." And I'm like, talking to me like, what food? And then actually when lockdown first started, I did go to 7-Eleven down the street from me, and some guy just started yelling Jackie Chan at me, which is not, I guess, that offensive to me, but it's still like, you're lumping me in with the only other Asian person you can think of. It's like, okay, that's original.
That really speaks to the lack of Asian American celebrities, by the way.
Yes.
Is they can do the one. They say the one, right? And then it's like, what? I think we just need more options. What's the
I've
answer?
always been called
You're like
Bobby Lee.
B plus
Like,
on originality.
so
Like, come on, give me more. Give me more celebrities. Give me more superpowers. Just
yeah. Where's give me some obscure Asian celeb.
If someone said Henry Golding, if someone said Henry Golding to me in the street, I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, thank you."
Henry Golding? You'd think of Henry Golding. Like, say it again. Say it louder.
Yeah. Just, one last comment. During lockdown, I mean, being in LA, like I always wore sunglasses, but sunglasses started to mean something different in lockdown because it meant that people couldn't see my Asian eyes. And so like I started to do that everywhere, like whenever I went into like a grocery store or something, because I was not necessarily afraid, because I felt more or less that LA is somewhat woke enough that wouldn't really happen. But it's still that internalized fear of like, is someone gonna like say some racist shit to me because of COVID right now or what? But I think that we definitely need to acknowledge that. Actually, no, not acknowledge. We need to tell people that the Chinese virus is not the Chinese virus. It's the coronavirus. It's its own virus. It's something that happens in the world, and it's no one's fault, especially no one from Asia. And people should really understand that, because that really, it just diminishes us in a way that makes it okay, because it's so widespread. And I think that whenever we see it, we should stamp it out, because not only does it hurt us, just by hearing those words, but that can cause, long-term emotional effects of just feeling attacked, and no one wants to feel attacked. But I really like the way, Kevin, when you brought up the celebrity thing, and when I said that someone called me Jackie Chan, I would absolutely love to discuss Asian representation in entertainment. I know we're basically all in media, and Kevin, you work a little bit more behind the scenes. But I would love to hear, experiences of you guys in navigating entertainment as an Asian American.
I'm an actor, so I'm directly, submitting to castings and things like that. And there's pros and cons to being a queer Asian actor at the moment. The pro is that I feel like Hollywood is moving towards diversity. The reason for that probably being money, but what's new? Welcome to America. Because that diversity is starting to sell more. But the con is that it's still getting there. So, for example, this is the best example I can give to people to like paint a picture. Most casting calls that you see will have a character breakdown and then they'll say any ethnicity. I call BS on that, because here's what happens is I'll look at a breakdown and it'll say like Kate, 18 to 24, and the ethnicity. I'll be like, cool, and then I'll submit, and then I'll scroll down and it says Kate's sister, Kate's mother, Kate's father. I'm like, they're not going to cast an Asian family. They're not going to do it, and they're also not going to cast like an adoptive or like an adopted child story unless that is what they're going for. So unless the movie itself is about an Asian family or an adopted child or whatever, it's not truly any ethnicity. And a lot of the times, like there's subtle ways that casting calls will kind of like discriminate against specific races or basically ask for Caucasian people without saying flat out we want someone white. One that I see all the time is all American. Like we want all American look, and that never means any other ethnicity. But it says any ethnicity. Exactly. I always submit for those just out of spite, because why not?
Can you please wear like an American crop top and like those blue apple bottom jeans?
Just
and,
like put on
boots.
a blonde wig and blue contacts.
Yeah. So from like the behind the scenes casting standpoint, I feel like if you look at it on paper, it looks like people are more open to any ethnicities. But if you're actually like I can speak as someone who's going through the audition and submission process. It's like the actual number of times I get to submit for a lead role for something important is like slim to none. Like it's just very, very rare. Yeah. So it's still coming up, unfortunately.
For me, so like I'm not part of, I think, like mainstream Hollywood. Obviously because I work for Buzzfeed and social media and everything, I'm more on that side. And I know people get flack to social media. Like I know people hate Instagram and TikTok or whatever, and I do agree there's problems with social media, but the one thing that I can definitely say is a positive, it allowed Asian Americans to have a voice. When I was watching YouTube back in the day with Ryan Higa, Kev Jumbo, the Fung brothers, Wong Fu, into now, with Eugene Liang from the Try Guys. There's so many Asian American voices. Sure, they may not be in mainstream media, but if they're getting millions of views online and there's a whole younger generation watching them, it shows that you can still be somebody. And so that's, at least in terms of social media, yeah, sure. I also do think that there still is some bias and racism within social media itself, because we can talk about the whole, Instagram choosing a certain ethnicity to promote over others with their algorithm. But I do think that social media, if I can talk about it generally, has given Asian Americans a voice when mainstream Hollywood didn't. And because when I think about a lot of the creators, they talk about, mainstream media, Hollywood, they give us a chance. So we just use our own computers. We use our own janky, laptops or whatever we did and made our own stuff. And then they became superstars in their own right.
Can I piggyback off of something that Sean just said real quick? So I actually was in a Wong Fu short 2 years ago in 2018. And that was a crazy experience for me because I grew up watching Wong Fu. And so to actually get to work with him was nuts. But I wanted to say that was really important to me because it was, I think, the first lead role that was intersectional for me, where they acknowledged my identity or my character's identity as a queer person and as an Asian person. And to have that in an acting experience was something that I had never had before. And it made me realize wow, usually when I submit for things, I have to pick and choose, do I want to market my queer side or do I want to market my Asian side, But I think it's cool that, speaking on what you were saying, that social media does allow for way more diversity, and because it's user created content, as opposed to what's being made.
Oh my gosh, you were famous.
Queen. Kevin, so given that you have your communications background and I do PR and I also do acting, have you ever, and for everyone, have you guys ever felt discouraged from pursuing a career in entertainment because of your Asian American identity or queer identity? I know that for me, I've had some times where I'm PR, like maybe that's my plan B. Maybe acting just can't happen for me because I'm not half white, or I'm not like Henry Golding or whatever. And that has also transferred over to like my PR work too, where sometimes I felt, not visible because I'm perceived as like the quiet Asian just plugging away, like being told what to do. But have you ever experienced that, Kevin, like in the media world?
I am so ready to speak on this. So
Yes.
we mentioned stereotypes before and stigmas. One of the biggest stereotypes is that Asian people are meek, or they're shy, they're soft-spoken. I think we can tell right now that the four of us are very much not. So when it comes to having to speak up in a meeting, or when it comes to being perceived as a communications or PR professional, I think people have a lot of preconceived notions of what, or the personalities of what communications professionals are, right? So living up to something like that can be pretty difficult, but I also feel like that has pushed me to almost make up for that, right? Like push myself to open up a little more, to speak up in a meeting when maybe normally I wouldn't have. And I force myself, because of that, I force myself to do that. I actively try to fight that stereotype. And I don't know if that's, I don't have the answer if that's the right thing to do, but it does feel right to myself to combat that stereotype. When it comes to, I guess, visibility, I'm in all of my jobs, really, I've been probably the most senior Asian American person, and not at Trevor, but usually the more senior LGBTQ person. I say not at Trevor because obviously a lot of people at Trevor are LGBTQ. So for me, it's almost like, if I don't do this, who will, right? If I don't do this, then people don't see themselves reflected in a leadership role if they're Asian American or LGBTQ or both. So I do think it's important in that vein.
Definitely. Yes. So, go ahead, please.
I was just going to speak kind of what you were saying about being an actor as well. I think that there's a very specific kind of like TV face or like movie face that we see, and it's even when you look at famous Asians, like let's take Lucy Liu for example, they have features that are revered in Western cultures. So like high cheekbones, sharp chins, sharp faces, like angular profiles, double eyelids, things like that. I find that is way more prominent in Asian faces that are represented. And, Kevin, I feel similarly to what you said. It's like, that gets me down occasionally, but then I'm like, why am I letting like the limits of how I look, like stop what I actually want to do and what I'm here to do? So like, if I don't do it, who will, Might as well try. So here I am.
Just to kind of go off of what everyone else has said, I kind of feel the same way. There's times where I do feel down, but low-key, I just think of Lizzo and just like, okay, I'm a badass bitch, cool. I'm like, work. I'm like, look at me. But real talk, like you have to be your biggest fan, like straight up, because you have to be. I've always told myself, like, no matter what, I'm going to be seen, I'm going to be heard. And yes, even though I'm Asian, like. Trust me, I'm loud. Sometimes I'm a little too loud, to be honest. But I'm loud, and y'all gonna see me. Y'all gonna hear me eventually. So sorry if you don't like it, but I'm gonna be unapologetically myself, because if not, I know I'm gonna be trampled on, and I'm definitely not gonna let that happen.
We want more of it.
Yes, I think that's a very important message as well, because it's something that I had to learn. I think that a lot of people in our community can maybe try in their own personal time or life, is to be loud, speak up, because I think I even, champion my own friends in my life that are maybe afraid to ask about a raise, or like maybe afraid to ask for this or that. And I think the overall gist of this whole chat is communication and speaking out loud, not just as an Asian, but as just a person, and a person with thoughts and feelings and wants, needs, and desires. And I think we all crave something, and we just have to vocalize it and let it be known.
We all amazing. We're all good. We're all in our little fantasy. So don't worry. Welcome to our world. We're all the main characters of our anime series. We Gucci, so trust.
Yes. But yeah, so we are wrapping up now. So I wanted to thank you guys for taking the time to speak about all these topics. And I hope that we had a cohesive conversation. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't, whatever. But I think that these are very, very important topics that we brought to light. And I think that we did some good work today. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much for that.
Thanks for having us.
And thanks to the mighty.
Thank you.